On a website, a tiny hand clicks on a watercolor map of the world, then searches for Seattle. We zoom in on a hand-painted rendering of the city's street grid.
I wanted to embrace the history of cartography as a way of saying, look, it doesn't have to be just straight lines.
Cooper Hewitt, Smithsonian Design Museum. Watercolor Maptiles by Stamen Design. A light-skinned man with a red beard, Stamen founder and creative director Eric Rodenbeck, is backed by a monitor displaying a watercolor map.
2005, when Google Maps first came out, I was terrified. I thought our work was over. That's it. The machines have eaten the market, and there's going to be no more mapping work to do. So when this came out, it was talked about in the press as an alternative to Google Maps, and then more cogently, OpenStreetMap was seen as the alternative to Google Street Maps for a lot of different reasons. So it was kind of part of that conversation.
A line map is explored.
People don't think about who's making these maps or how they get made or any of that, how they get updated or any of that kind of stuff. And it's an incredibly complex, fascinating, multi-layered, continuous, ongoing artifact, technical artifact that is made by robots. It's a collaboration between robots and humans, and it's amazing,
Watercolor maps are explored.
So I didn't want to make a nostalgic gesture, but I did want to call attention to the fact that these maps were being made by people. I really wanted to sort of get this kind of this texture of a city, to give it almost this hallucinatory quality, where you just would pay attention not just to it as a directional device, but as something with composition. But the composition, of course, is made by the world, not by us, right?
Behind the design.
It was mainly a collaboration between Geraldine and Zach Watson. And Mike Nagurski worked with Zach to design a process by which these could be generated using the textures. Geraldine made a number of textures, which we've blogged about. And then Zach Watson started making maps out of them and sort of putting them through the different pieces of software that he was using. And then he'd go back to Geraldine and say, what do you think about this? And then she would make a new texture for him. And they were able to really adjust the way in which the lines here, you'll see that they're not straight very much by design. They overlap one another, and that's all very intentional. And really the whole point was to make something that you couldn't tell what parts of it had been done by hand and what parts of it had been done by a machine. I wanted that line to be blurred. So it was very much always intended to be, and continues to be, driven by OpenStreetMap.
More maps are explored.
The data that's underlying it is exactly the same, but there's a number of different steps. There's essentially a rendering process that happens to get something that, from a data perspective, looks much more like that to something that looks like that. So there's blurring and there's noising and there's Perlin filters and there's blowing out and there's all that stuff. And the whole point of this was to make it as bone simple as it possible. I mean, to make something that was highly difficult and virtuosic and took a lot of resources and just flatten people's ability to access it. Make it so that it was you didn't need to sign up. There's no API. There's no technical. You copy and paste this, put it on your website. You've got a map.
Watercolor Maptiles use.
Rather than having to do a screenshot and do all that nonsense, you should just be able to adjust the size, and you can. And then this is where we show you all the different styles that there are. There's more than are on the front. So there's these images that get made, and then you can go to results, and you can see all the maps that people have made.
Examples are shown.
This was another thing that was just really distracting to me as the project developed, of just like where in the world do people care about enough to make these images? And it turns out thousands and thousands and thousands of places. And why did somebody pick this particular, this looks like it was done for a school project, somebody's doing a project about Southeast Asia. People are just making these for use in their projects, and there's, one every couple of minutes.
Some maps are in color, others in black and white. Some feature hundreds of streets, others few or none. On maps.
The most viewed place on Google Maps is your house, right? That's where people always go. And it's an amazing phenomenon. Like, you have a map of the whole world. You could go to Petra. You could go to the skyscrapers of Hong Kong. You could go to Antarctica. You could go anywhere, but where do you go? Your house. And it's sort of and in some ways that's a sort of grounding gesture of like, well, if I know my house is on there, I can recognize that my house. That's sort of a touchstone that means that, well, if this is accurate, then everything else must be accurate. And I think something like that is going on here. People are making maps of the places that they care about, which can be, as broad as Europe or as narrow as, a part.
We zoom in on a green space.
And that's a sort of wonderful thing about these maps and maps like this in general, is that there's this kind of, people care about them.
Watercolor Maptiles website, 2012 to 15. Designed by Eric Rodenbeck, Zachary Watson, Geraldine Sarmiento, Nathaniel Kelso, and Michael Magursky. Stamen Design.